This video contains spoilers for Comic Cat Seasons 1 through 4. If you haven't read the series, please do so on tanaguest.com/comics before watching this. Otherwise, you'll be spoiled and also have no idea what I'm talking about. Comic Cat Season 3 was near perfect in my eyes. I was so proud of the art, I did a lot of nice world building, I told an interesting story with what I considered to be a perfect ending. Comic Cat could have ended right there, but I wanted to do a 4th season. Going into Season 4, I didn't think it would be possible to even come close to making it as good as Season 3. So I didn't. Let me elaborate. With Comic Cat, I was never interested in doing just a standard comic strip. I've always wanted to experiment more with the format of comic strips. Each season has a different storyline and attempts different themes and messages with varying degrees of success. Season 1 was about a couple of friends making a comic strip and the different challenges that come along with it. It's a very simple storyline, aside from the entire season being one massive fourth wall break. It's probably the closest the series has ever been to being a quote-unquote standard comic strip. Season 2 attempted to tell an epic through the format of a comic strip. I made it as insane and convoluted as I could to push the theme of jumping the shark and the question of how to come back from something like that. Everyone, including myself, tends to agree that it could have been done a bit better. Season 3 seems like a pretty standard week-by-week comic strip at first glance, but tells a very subtle, character-driven drama throughout the course of the season, focusing more on Comic as a character and the struggles of dealing with change. Season 4 follows what is, in my opinion, the best season of Comic Cat, and what honestly could have been a great finale to just the entire strip. With Season 4, I really wanted to go back to the ideas set up in Season 1 of the difficulties of running a comic strip. Most long-running TV shows come to a point where things just keep going, and it feels like they shouldn't. Most of the people who started the show, both on-screen and off, have moved on to other projects. The show just doesn't have the same magic that it used to. You can tell that something feels very different. This is the theme that I wanted to explore with Comic Cat Season 4. After Season 3, Comic is worried that the same thing is happening to his comic strip and wants to do whatever he can to prevent it. So let's go throughout the season and discuss just how I did this, what worked, and what didn't. Firstly, let's talk about the cast in this season. Comic and Ham are the only two members of the main cast from Season 1 to make a return. Throughout the course of the season, I really wanted it to feel like everything was just a little bit off. Not bad per se, but sometimes not quite feel like Comic Cat. And choosing the cast was maybe the most important piece to this. Dog, Snelly, Taco, and Red were all favorite characters of the series who had been around since the very beginning, and at this point in the series, all of them have moved on. You can't imagine the series going on without these characters, but here we are. I wanted Comic to have a more work with what you've got attitude throughout the season, struggling to keep things running smoothly without some of the most popular characters. Not even Fish appears in this season. Both Chewie and Ricky from Season 3 did return though. Without them, I don't think I would have even attempted this storyline. They were some of the best parts of the previous season, and once again, especially with Ricky, kind of carry this season to an extent. There were a couple of returning characters with minor roles as well. Star comes back for one strip near the end, Joey pops in a couple of times, Running Gag, despite appearing in the background of many Season 3 strips as a running gag, only makes one cameo in this season. Of course, this was to add to the feeling that things were different, but Running Gag felt like such a big part of Season 3's identity. No matter what I decided to do with Season 4, I don't think I would have done the same thing with him. His brief cameo is also maybe the best joke of the season. The last returning character is the self-promotion robot from Season 1. Like I said, I wanted Comic to have a bit of a work with what you've got kind of attitude towards making the strips. Most of the beloved characters are gone, and Comic's bringing out a one-time joke character out of retirement to try to keep the reader's attention for a bit of fan service, which is a subject I'll dive deeper into during the second half of this review. I thought this would be a fun one to bring back just because it worked to fit the strip's joke well. So now let's talk about a couple of the new characters this season, starting with Dr. Bat, who's a very minor character but plays an important role in the finale. Both of her strips are some of the funniest in this season in my opinion. I got some feedback suggesting I should have shown how Comic met Dr. Bat for the finale, but I didn't really think that was worth exploring. What I was kind of going for was this small joke that just everyone has the same doctor, and I actually included that running gag strip originally to introduce that doctor for the finale. And then we come to Typo. The introduction of Typo was purely for the purpose of the season's overarching story. Many beloved characters are now gone, and Typo is introduced to fill that void. Characters like Red or Snelly or Ricky, you can tell everything about these characters and who they are from just their introductory strip. Typo, on the other hand, is intentionally a bit harder to get a feel for. Now, of course, just having a bland character replacing these very characterized and unique ones for the sake of it would only be leaning into the things I was poking fun at. So I dedicated a few strips to commentary on this trend that shows up. The first major instance in the strip is where Comic talks to Ham, first talking about how something fell off with the season, and again in cast changes. And this one, Typo was just hanging out in Comic's house despite the two not knowing each other just because she's the new character and everyone but Comic is just going along with it. Some of the strips in the first half of the season were pretty good, but I think I could have done a better job getting the ideas across, I think. Season 3's story was subtle, but readers were still able to follow along pretty nicely throughout the whole season. This season, at least in the first half, maybe isn't quite as clear. Many people didn't seem to get that there was an overarching story early on, and I think that hurts the second half a bit more. I think if I made things just a little bit smoother early on, I think the weirder parts later in the season wouldn't have felt quite as out of nowhere to readers reading on a week-to-week basis. Overall, I think the first half of this season is pretty alright. A couple of these strips are contenders for my favorites in the series. I really loved the Chewie birthday strip a lot. A couple of these, though, are just kinda eh. The strip with Fred the Invisible Fire-Breathing Butterfly is probably the weakest strip in the season. This is almost an exact remake of a comic strip that I made way back in about 2010. I didn't want to do this one because I thought it was good. It's really not, but I thought it was the funniest thing back in middle school. So when I see this strip now, yes, it's stupid and not very funny, but I'm reminded of a younger, more carefree Tad, and I remember how much laughter these cheesy, decade-old strips gave me. I'd never made this one before because it would feel weird to throw in the middle of the other seasons. It just wouldn't really fit. But with the storyline revolving around Comic thinking they had gone on too long and the quality was dropping, I thought I could somewhat justify to myself throwing this dumb one in here. I brought back Running Gag for a cameo. Let me have this one, guys. Anyway, let's talk about the weird part now. Obviously, the second half of this season has a lot to talk about, so I'll have to take this portion of the video a little more strip by strip to really talk about it properly. The first two are pretty straightforward. Comic and Ricky find a genie, make some funny jokes. The first genie strip is another one of my favorites in this season. Reading the first two, they don't really seem like they tie into the rest of the season's story just yet, and just seems like typical Comic Cat shenanigans, but like I said, it didn't seem like many people really grasped the ongoing story of the season up to this point anyway, so I don't think it seemed like anything was that different. In Comic Cat Babies, we see the genie storyline cross paths with the ongoing story. Comic up to this point has felt like the season was lacking, and with his newfound magic power, could do whatever it took to fix it. I feel like one or two more strips in between this one and the next might have done the season some good. Then we come to the weird one. I actually kind of have to go panel by panel here. There's a lot to unpack. This is also probably the prettiest strip in the series. I spent way too much time on the Comic Cat Hellscape backgrounds. Anyway, so Comic is talking to Typo about fixing the comic, and finally giving people what they want. During this whole scene, we see a lot of classic Comic Cat imagery in the background. Joey, Comic's reality face, Red, the car, the bowling ball, leg grow, self-promo bot, and Ricky's sword. There's no real meaning behind them, as Typo says it's just shallow fan service. And then Comic Thanos snaps Typo out of existence. I actually did run a poll on the least favorite Comic Cat character, and when I saw Typo leading the pack, I knew I had done what I had set out to do with the character. This was always the plan from the beginning of the season, and where the character's name actually came from. Kamek had to remove the typo to fix the comic, or so he thinks. We also see a lot of old Season 2 imagery flying around Kamek during this part, which we'll see again in a couple strips later. I made this strip for the same reason Kamek wanted to make this strip, to get a reaction. There's fan service, there's shock value, there's not much deeper meaning to them in the context of the story, it's just Kamek trying to get people to talk about the strip again. And his plan worked. After the strip was published, more people were talking about it than any other strip in the season. Kamek wanted people to talk about it, and he gave them a reason, but he didn't give them any deeper value or purpose behind those things. He did them just to create a temporary interest. And after the strip, people lost interest in the storyline because of this, and a lot of people didn't particularly enjoy the rest of the season. Like I said at the start of this video, more than just making a standard comic strip, Comic Cat is more about an artistic vision. I know that sounds silly and dumb for a weekly cat cartoon, and yes, it is, but Comic Cat has always been about finding unique and strange forms of storytelling. The storyline was meant to feel somewhat rushed and sloppy near the end because that was the story I was trying to tell. Kamek is known for his very poor decision making and acting on first instinct without thinking about the consequences much. He feels like the strip isn't very good, and in a misguided attempt to fix it, he starts making things worse and worse, resulting in the last couple of strips feeling rushed. And I do completely understand why people wouldn't like these last couple strips as much. I put Kamek's character, his thoughts, his struggles at the forefront of these last few strips, and sort of sacrificed some of the stuff that might have made the story better as a whole. I'm getting a little ahead of myself though. Let's talk about a few of these in particular. The filler strip was just one that I wanted to do to keep some light comedy in the middle of the story, and I thought it made for a pretty funny gag. The strip with Ham and Star was an important one for me to add because I really wanted to show Ham's growth as a character since the strip started. In Season 1, Ham was terrified of everything, but from season to season he's gained a little bit more confidence, and now in Season 4 he's casually talking to his girlfriend about the possible destruction of the world like it's nothing. Let's talk about Eraser. This is the one that most people seem to take the most problems with. Some people suggested that maybe there should have been one or two more strips before this one. The change is kinda sudden, and it seems like a bit of an afterthought. This wasn't actually the original strip I was going to have in here. I had another idea that was a lot more grand and probably satisfying, but it wasn't really working out. Just going from the strip of Ham and Kamek talking to the final strip, I feel like would have been an even more rushed transition, so I settled on something a bit more simple. I left Kamek out of this one because I felt like had he appeared here, it would have come across as either, oh well he's better now, he's not crazy anymore, or it would have felt too similar to the end of the conflict in Season 3's finale. In the end, I felt like there was only one way to really get Kamek's feelings across without it feeling too ham-fisted or corny, and that was to just not include him in the strip at all. Kamek going from power mad, believing he was really fixing all of his problems, to just choosing not to appear in the following strip. I felt like that was really the only way I could show where Kamek's head was at. I couldn't do a, oh sorry guys, haha, I'm okay now strip, because as we see in the finale, he's not. And I do want to point out too that I'm not saying, oh no, it's good because I intended it to be that way, you can't criticize it. I'm just trying to explain where I was coming from while writing these strips. From the earliest planning stages of this season, I knew that this would be the final strip. From the very beginning, I knew how I wanted it to end. Despite some issues I have with the season here and there, I really do love this ending. It's a perfect ending for this season in my opinion, and one of my favorite jokes I've done with the strip. It could honestly be a perfect ending for the entire series, it just feels so Comic Cat. But it won't be. There will be a Season 5. As is the case with every season, I'm doing something different, but I think you guys are gonna like this next one a lot. It will be a bit of a wait though. I'm working on Memories of Mirth, my other comic right now, and a couple other projects, so stay tuned. Thank you for watching, and thank you for reading Comic Cat.